I, Alpha King Cashin of the Silverbane bloodline, reject you, Luna, as my fated mate and lunar of this pack." The words dropped like anvil strikes into the dead silence of the Grand Hall. Hundreds of elite wolves held their collective breath, waiting for the frail, orphaned girl to collapse. They expected tears. They expected a humiliating, desperate display of begging. Instead, a soft sound broke the quiet. Luna tipped her head back, her dark eyes flashing, and let out a breathless, genuine laugh. It wasn't a sound of hysteria, but of profound, mocking pity. "You reject me," she whispered, the smile lingering on her lips as Cashin's jaw clenched in sudden, inexplicable dread. "Oh, Cashin, you have absolutely no idea what you've just done." The laugh continued to ripple through the cavernous space of the Silverbane estate, bouncing off the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the dark, sprawling forests of the territory. In the modern werewolf hierarchy, a rejection was a visceral, bloody tearing of the soul. It was a physical blow that was supposed to drive the rejected to their knees, gasping for air as the mating bond severed. Luna stood perfectly upright. She smoothed the front of her simple charcoal gray dress, the fabric a stark contrast to the glittering designer gowns worn by the high-ranking female wolves in the room. Her heartbeat, which by all biological laws should have been stuttering into cardiac arrest, was steady, slow, rhythmic. Cashin stood on the raised marble dais, his towering frame rigid. He was a man accustomed to absolute obedience with sharp aristocratic features, eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea, and the overwhelming aura of an apex predator. He ruled not just his pack, but a coalition of 7 regional factions. He was a king in every sense of the modern word, CEO of a global conglomerate by day, ruthless enforcer of ancient laws by night. And right now he was entirely unnerved. "Have you lost your mind?" Cashin demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, growly timbre that usually forced lesser wolves to bare their throats. "There is nothing amusing about a severing, Luna. I have made my choice for the survival of my lineage." He gestured rigidly to the woman standing half a step behind him. Deanna, daughter of the Northern Alpha. She was stunning, wrapped in crimson silk, her posture exuding predatory confidence. She was a political masterpiece, a thoroughbred wolf meant to breed strong heirs. Luna, on the other hand, was an anomaly. A girl found wandering the neutral zones 12 years ago with no memory, no pack, and a wolf spirit so quiet most assumed she was defective. When the mating moon had unexpectedly tied Cashin's soul to Luna's 3 days ago, he had treated it as a sick cosmic joke. Alpha Kings did not mate with nameless strays. "I am perfectly sane, Your Majesty," Luna replied, the title dripping with a quiet, icy sarcasm. She didn't look at Diana. She kept her gaze locked entirely on Cashin. "I am merely marveling at your arrogance. You speak of survival, yet you cannot see the rot already clinging to your own shadow." Low growl ripped through the hall. Several enforcers stepped forward, their eyes flashing amber in defense of their alpha. Cashin held up a single sharp hand. The movement stopped them dead, but it couldn't stop the heavy, suffocating tension filling the room. Cashin's inner wolf was thrashing against his ribs, not with anger, but with a blind, frantic terror he had never experienced. It was howling, clawing at his mind, screaming at him to fall to his knees and begged the small woman in gray to forgive him. Cashin gritted his teeth, forcing the beast down. He was a creature of logic and power. He would not be governed by a misplaced biological glitch. "You are dismissed, Luna," Cashin said, his voice cold, devoid of the emotion he was desperately trying to suppress. "You will be given a severance package, a penthouse in the city, an allowance and safe passage out of Silverbane territory by midnight. You will never set foot in these woods again." Luna's smile finally faded, leaving a chillingly blank expression in its wake. The air around her seemed to shimmer, the temperature in the grand hall plummeting a few degrees. "Keep your money, Cashin. I pack light." She turned her back on the Alpha King. In werewolf society, turning your back on a superior without permission was an act of supreme defiance. Yet, as she walked down the long velvet-lined aisle toward the heavy oak doors, not a single enforcer moved to stop her. It was as if a heavy invisible gravity was pushing them back, pinning them to the floor. Cashin watched her go, a strange hollow ache blooming in his chest. As the heavy doors groaned open and clicked shut behind her, the grand hall plunged into a suffocating silence. Diana stepped forward, laying a manicured hand on Cashin's bicep. She's delusional, Cashin, a broken Omega. You did what was necessary for the throne. Cashin looked down at Diana's hand. He felt absolutely nothing. The protective warmth that was supposed to blanket an alpha's territory, a warmth he hadn't realized was there until this exact moment, had vanished with the click of the door. Yes, Cashin murmured, his eyes fixed on the empty space where Luna had stood. Necessary. But as a sudden violent shiver racked his spine, he wondered why victory felt so much like a death sentence. The physical backlash hit Luna the moment she crossed the threshold into the servant's wing away from the prying eyes of the elite. She staggered against the cool plaster wall, a sharp gasp tearing from her throat as a searing pain slashed across her collarbone. It felt as though a branding iron had been pressed directly against her soul. The mating mark that had begun to form beneath her skin, a faint silver crest unique to Cashin's bloodline, was burning away, leaving a bruised, hollow ache. She slid down the wall to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, breathing in slow, measured counts of 4. Inhale the pain, exhale the tether. Most female wolves would be bleeding out of their noses by now, their minds fracturing under the weight of an alpha king's rejection. The psychological trauma usually required weeks of sedation, but Luna was not most wolves. As she closed her eyes, she didn't feel the pack bond shattering. She felt a parasite being forcibly detached. She opened her eyes, catching her reflection in the glass of a darkened display cabinet opposite her. For a split second, the familiar deep brown of her irises was gone, replaced by a blinding luminescent silver. The mark of the Aurelian, her mother's voice, a ghost from a past buried under decades of blood and ash, echoed in her mind. Hide the silver, little moon. The Alpha Kings have forgotten the old packs. They are consumed by their own power. If they see what you are, they will not revere you. They will cage you to siphon your light. Only a true mate, one who chooses your soul over your power, can be trusted. Cashin had failed the test spectacularly. Luna pushed herself off the floor, dusting off her skirt. She walked down the narrow corridor to her small Spartan room. She owned very little. A few books, some basic clothing, and a small wooden locked box hidden under her floorboards. She pulled her duffel bag from the closet and began tossing her clothes inside with practiced efficiency. She wasn't angry at Cashin. Anger required an emotional investment she refused to give a man so blinded by his own hubris. She was, however, deeply concerned for the continent. The Aurelians were the original Lunas, the spiritual anchors designed by the moon goddess to filter the dark, feral energy that naturally accumulated in the bloodlines of Alpha Kings. Without an Aurelian mate, an Alpha King's power eventually turned inward, rotting their minds, turning them into rabid tyrants. It was a condition whispered about in the dark corners of history, the feral curse. Luna was the last Aurelian. Cashin was the strongest Alpha King in 5 centuries. The goddess had paired them to save him, and by extension thousands of wolves, and he had just thrown her out for a woman in a red silk dress. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Silas, Cashin's beta and closest confidant, stood in the doorway. Unlike his king, Silas looked physically ill. He was pale, leaning heavily against the doorframe, rubbing his chest as if trying to soothe a phantom wound. The empathetic shock wave of the rejection was hitting the higher-ranking pack members hard. "You're leaving," Silas said, his voice rough. "That was the royal decree, wasn't it?" Luna zipped her duffel bag, slinging it over her shoulder. She knelt, pried up the loose floorboard, and retrieved the small wooden box, slipping it into her coat pocket. Silas watched her, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "You shouldn't be standing. You shouldn't even be conscious." "The medical team is standing by with sedatives, Luna. Let them help you." "I don't need sedatives, Silas." Luna walked toward him, stopping just inches away. Silas flinched. He was a massive man, a lethal fighter. But up close, he realized with a spike of alarm that he could not sense her wolf at all. It wasn't dormant. It was shielded behind a wall of pure, impenetrable static. "Cashin thinks he made a strategic move," Silas whispered, looking over his shoulder down the empty hallway. "Diana brings the northern armies. The rogues have been massing at the borders. He did it for the pack." "He did it out of fear," Luna corrected gently. He looked at the mate the universe handed him, saw no armies, no political leverage, and he panicked. He chose the armor over the cure. Silas frowned. The cure for what? Tell him to watch the shadows, Silas, Luna said softly, stepping past him into the hallway. When the cold sets in and his reflection stops looking like the man he thinks he is, tell him he had the chance to stop it. And he laughed at it. Silas turned, reaching out a hand as if to grab her shoulder, but his fingers hit empty air. A sudden, sharp chill swept down the corridor, smelling of ozone and crushed pine. He blinked, and Luna was already at the end of the hall, slipping out the side door into the freezing autumn night. Silas looked down at his hand. It was trembling. For the first time in his life, the beta of the Silverbane pack felt entirely, utterly defenseless. The ceremonial mating of an alpha king was supposed to be an event of unbridled passion and overwhelming power. It was meant to be a merging of souls that sent a pulse of vitality through every member of the pack, fortifying the territorial wards and bringing prosperity to the land. Cashin stood on the balcony of the Alpha Suite, staring out at the impenetrable darkness of the Silverbane forest. Inside the bedroom, Diana lay on the massive four-poster bed, draped in expensive lingerie, waiting for him to claim her, to officially seal the political bond. Yet Cashin's boots felt as though they were cast in lead. He gripped the wrought iron railing of the balcony until the metal groaned under the pressure. It had been 4 hours since Luna walked out of the estate, 4 hours since he severed the bond. By all accounts, he should feel liberated. He had secured the northern armies. He had fortified his political standing among the council. He was invincible. So why was he freezing? Despite his accelerated werewolf metabolism, a deep, bone-aching cold had settled into his marrow. It wasn't the ambient temperature of the autumn night. It was an internal frost, creeping up from his chest, wrapping icy fingers around his lungs. His wolf, usually a roaring, dominant presence in his mind, was huddled in the dark corners of his consciousness, silent and shivering. When Cashin tried to reach for it, to summon the heat of the shift, the beast bared its teeth at him. A flash of hostility from his own soul that made Cashin stumble back from the railing. Cashin. Diana's voice drifted from the bedroom, sultry and impatient. The elders are waiting to feel the bond snap into place. You're keeping the kingdom waiting. He closed his eyes, forcing a breath through his nose. He had to finish this. He turned back toward the room, forcing his face into a mask of stoic authority. But as he looked at Diana, bathed in the soft glow of the bedside lamps, he felt a wave of profound nausea. She was beautiful, yes, but looking at her felt like looking at a mannequin. There was no spark, no magnetic pull, no invisible string tying his heart to hers. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing alarm shattered the quiet of the estate. Cashin's eyes snapped open, glowing a furious, unnatural crimson. The emergency sirens from the Northern Border Patrol. He didn't say a word to Diana. He vaulted over the balcony railing, dropping 3 stories to the manicured lawn below, landing in a perfect crouch. Silas was already running across the grass, his phone pressed to his ear, his face pale in the moonlight. "Report," Cashin barked, his voice echoing in the still night air. "It's the northern perimeter, Sector 4, Silas said, breathing heavily. "The wards, Cashin, the wards are failing, we have a breach." Cashin grabbed Silas by the collar. "Impossible. The wards are tied to my life force. They don't fail unless I am dead." "The patrol didn't report a normal rogue attack," Silas said, swallowing hard, avoiding his alpha's glowing eyes. "They said the rogues just walked right through the boundary line. The silver ash trees didn't repel them. And Cashin, the patrol said the rogues weren't acting right. They weren't fighting for territory. They were rabid, feral." Cashin released Silas, a cold shard of dread piercing his chest. Feral rogues were a myth, a bedtime story told to scare pups. Wolves whose minds had completely snapped, driven only by a cannibalistic hunger. They couldn't bypass ancient pack wards. It was magically and biologically impossible. Unless the alpha anchoring the wards was fundamentally broken. Cashin looked toward the southern road, the path Luna had taken just hours ago. He remembered her breathless, pitying laugh. He remembered the exact words she had spoken, words that were now echoing in his mind like a death knell. "You have absolutely no idea what you've just done." "Mobilize the guard," Cashin ordered, his voice suddenly hollow. "All of them, send Diana's men to the front lines." "And you?" Silas asked, already turning to shout orders. Cashin looked down at his hands. The veins beneath his skin, usually a healthy, vibrant blue, were pulsing with a faint, sickly black tint. The rot, the curse of the kings. It wasn't a myth. It was real, and without his true mate, it was already eating him alive. "I need to find a file," Cashin said quietly, turning back toward the estate. "I need to find out exactly who it was I just threw away." The Silverbane archives were buried 3 sublevels beneath the estate. A sprawling labyrinth of temperature-controlled vaults that held the bloodline histories of every recognized pack in the Northern Hemisphere. It was a place of sterile white lights and hermetically sealed glass, reeking of old paper, ozone, and secrets. Cashin tore through the reinforced doors without scanning his retinas, ripping the heavy steel off its pneumatic hinges with a violent surge of brute strength. He didn't even register the screech of the metal. His breathing was ragged. The black veins, initially confined to the back of his hands, had begun a slow, agonizing crawl up his forearms. Every beat of his heart pumped a slush of ice and adrenaline through his system. His inner wolf wasn't just silent anymore. It was actively recoiling from him, curling into a tight, defensive ball within his mind, terrified of the toxic rot spreading through their shared vessel. "Computer search queries," Cashin barked at the computer, his voice echoing off the endless rows of glass cabinets. "Cross-reference unmarked female wolf 12 years ago, neutral zone borders, add modifier fated mate to alpha bloodline." The artificial intelligence of the archive hummed. A synthesized voice filled the room. "Query too broad. 34,000 results found. Please narrow parameters." Cashin slammed his fist onto the stainless steel console, denting it inward. Damn it. He closed his eyes, leaning heavily against the console. His mind was fracturing, the edges of his vision blurring with a terrifying, unnatural crimson static. He needed something specific, something about her. "Hide the silver little moon." The whispered phrase drifted through his deteriorating consciousness. He didn't know where it came from. A phantom memory bleeding through the severed, ragged edge of their broken bond, perhaps. But the word stuck. "Silver." "New query," Cashin grasped, his throat feeling as though it were lined with crushed glass. "Cross-reference mythical or extinct wolf lineages, identifying markers, silver eyes or lack of pack scent." The terminal hummed for a full 10 seconds. A red light blinked on the console. "Accessing level 0 restrictions. 1 matching record found. Title, The Aurelian Pact. Access requires Alpha King blood cipher." Cashin didn't hesitate. He drew one of the ceremonial silver daggers from his boot, sliced a clean line across his palm, and pressed his bleeding hand to the glass scanner. The machine whirred, analyzing his DNA. A heavy hydraulic hiss sounded from the far end of the room. A section of the wall slid away, revealing a small, dusty alcove that hadn't been opened in centuries. Cashin stumbled toward it. Inside rested a single decaying leather tome, sitting on a velvet cushion. He flipped the heavy cover open. The parchment was brittle, filled with hand-drawn anatomical diagrams of wolves and archaic script. But it was the illustration on the 3rd page that made Cashin's breath hitch in his throat. It was a drawing of a woman, her eyes filled in with a shimmering metallic pigment. Beside the drawing was a block of text, translated into modern English. At the bottom of the page, "The Aurelians, the moon goddesses fail safe. Alpha kings are forged with an excess of dominion energy, a power necessary to rule, but toxic to the soul. Without an Aurelian mate to filter and anchor this dark energy, the king's mind will inevitably sour. This is the feral curse. The king will turn on his own, his power eating him from the inside out until nothing remains but a rabid beast. The Aurelians are not warriors. They are the cure. Cashin stared at the words until they blurred. The cure. He hadn't just rejected a weak, politically useless Omega. He had violently severed himself from his own spiritual immune system. He had looked at the life raft the universe had desperately thrown him, mocked it, and set it on fire. Heavy footsteps echoed behind him. Silas rounded the corner, his tactical gear splattered with dark, viscous blood. The beta stopped dead when he saw Cashin, his eyes widening in horror at the dark, creeping veins visible on the Alpha King's neck. "Cashin," Silas whispered, taking a slow step back, the instinct to submit to his alpha suddenly at war with the prey-driven instinct to run from a rabid predator. "The northern border?" Cashin asked, not turning around, his voice completely devoid of its usual commanding resonance. "Gone," Silas said, his voice trembling. "Diana's armies refused to hold the line. They said they couldn't feel the king's aura. They panicked. The feral rogues are pushing into the civilian sectors. We are losing, Cashin. Whatever you did when you sent Lunar away, you broke the pack's anchor." Cashin slowly closed the ancient tome. He didn't feel the panic anymore. The freezing cold had numbed him entirely. "Get the helicopters ready," Cashin ordered, turning to face his beta. His eyes, usually a vibrant, stormy sea gray, were completely bloodshot, the irises bleeding into a terrifying hollow black. "I'm going to find my mate." Luna sat on the cracked mosaic floor of an abandoned church on the absolute fringes of the human city, 50 miles outside Silverbane territory. The air here was stale, thick with the scent of old incense and damp stone, but it was quiet. It was a recognized neutral zone, steeped in old hedge magic that masked the sense of supernatural creatures from one another. She had a single battery-powered lantern illuminating the space around her. Her charcoal dress was ruined, stained with dirt and sweat from the grueling hike, but she paid it no mind. Her focus was entirely on the small wooden box she had retrieved from beneath her floorboards. She had opened it, laying its contents meticulously on the stone floor. A vial of luminescent milky liquid, a bundle of dried sage, and a small, wickedly sharp obsidian knife. She was dying. It was a slow, quiet death, but a certainty nonetheless. The mating bond of an Aurelian wasn't just a biological imperative. It was a conduit. When Cashin had rejected her, he hadn't just broken a spiritual tie. He had slammed the door on an active, pressurized line of energy. The raw, unfiltered dark magic she was supposed to be siphoning from him had nowhere to go. It was backing up, pooling in her chest, suffocating her own heart. She coughed a wet, rattling sound and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. The saliva was laced with silver. "You look terrible, little moon." Luna didn't jump at the voice. She slowly lifted her head. Standing in the shadows, near the ruined altar, was Maeve. The old witch looked like a human woman in her late 60s, dressed in an oversized wool cardigan, but her eyes held the heavy, weary weight of centuries. Maeve was the caretaker of this sanctuary, one of the few beings alive who knew what Luna truly was. "It's the phantom bond," Luna said, her voice a raspy whisper. "He's deteriorating faster than I anticipated. The rot in his bloodline is deep. He's dragging me down with him through the severed tether." Maeve stepped into the light, her face twisting in sympathetic agony as she saw the silver blood on Luna's chin. "The fool, the arrogant, blind fool. He rejected the last Aurelian. Does he know? Did you tell him?" "No," Luna said simply. She picked up the obsidian knife, testing its edge against her thumb. "He wouldn't have believed me. Or worse, he would have kept me in a cage, using me like a dialysis machine while parading his northern princess around to satisfy his ego. An Aurelian bond requires absolute surrender, Maeve. He has to choose the soul, not the utility. He failed." Maeve knelt beside her, a profound sadness settling over her wrinkled features. "If he goes completely feral, the Silverbane pack will fall. The regional factions will tear each other apart, vying for the vacuum he leaves behind. It will be a bloodbath." "I know," Luna murmured. She uncorked the vial of milky liquid, sap from a true silver ash tree. That is why I am sealing the tether on my end. I will lock my wolf away. If I become completely human, the phantom bond will sever permanently. Cashin will face the consequences of his arrogance alone, and I will survive. Maeve gasped, her hand shooting out to grip Luna's wrist. Seal your wolf! Luna, the pain of a forced dormancy. It will tear your mind apart. You'll lose your strength, your extended life, your healing. You will just be a fragile, mortal woman. I would rather be a mortal woman who owns her soul than a captive goddess chained to a rabid king, Luna replied, her gaze unflinching. She pulled her hand free and dipped 2 fingers into the silver sap. She reached up, pressing the burning liquid to her collarbone, right over the bruised, hollow space where Cashin's mark should have been. The reaction was instantaneous. Luna screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony that echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the church. The silver sap seared into her skin, acting like a metaphysical cauterizing iron against the invisible bleeding wound of the rejection. Her body convulsed, her vision going white as her inner wolf howled in protest, fighting the unnatural suppression. Maeve chanted rapidly in an ancient tongue, holding her hands over Luna, trying to stabilize the girl's erratic heartbeat as the spell took hold. Suddenly, the heavy iron-bound doors of the church shuddered. The violent impact sent a shockwave of dust raining down from the rafters. The wards surrounding the building flared a brilliant, angry violet, hissing like water thrown on a hot stove. Someone was trying to break through the magical barrier. Not someone. A monster. Luna lay on the floor, gasping for air, her skin pale and slick with sweat. The silver glow in her eyes was dimming, flickering like a dying bulb. She turned her head toward the doors. Through the thick oak, she didn't hear a man demanding entry. She heard the guttural, wet snarl of a beast that had entirely lost its mind. The church doors didn't open. They exploded inward. Splinters of ancient wood shrapnel showered the nave as Cashin breached the threshold. He didn't look like an alpha king. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a nightmare dragged from the deepest abyss of the forest. His expensive tailored suit was shredded, soaked in the blood of feral rogues he had torn through to get here. The black veins had consumed the left side of his face, pulsing with a sick, erratic rhythm beneath his skin. His eyes were entirely pitch black, void of humanity, leaving only the predatory, starving gaze of an apex killer. Maeve stepped in front of Luna, raising her hands, her fingertips sparking with violet energy. Halt, King of the North! You violate sanctuary ground, the wards. Cashin didn't even slow down. He backhanded the air, and a shockwave of pure kinetic dominance slammed into the witch, throwing her 15 feet into the stone pews. Maeve crumpled, unconscious before she hit the ground. He moved toward Luna. His footsteps were heavy, echoing like drumbeats. The air around him was freezing, radiating a palpable aura of death and rot. When he reached her, he stopped, towering over her prone form. He expected her to scramble away. He expected her to scream. Luna slowly pushed herself up into a sitting position. She was incredibly weak, the sealing ritual only half completed, her body trapped in the agonizing limbo between wolf and human. But as she looked up at the towering, monstrous figure of the man who had discarded her, her expression remained chillingly stoic. "You're making a mess, Cashin," she said quietly. Cashin dropped to one knee, the marble cracking under his weight. He reached out with a trembling, clawed hand, grabbing the fabric of her ruined dress, pulling her roughly toward him. His breath hit her face. It smelled of copper, ozone, and decay. "Fix it," he growled. It wasn't a request. It was the desperate, violently possessive command of a dying animal. "You're an Aurelian. You're the cure. Fix the bond now." Luna didn't fight his grip. She simply looked at the clawed hand clutching her dress, then up into his blackened eyes. "You cannot order a soul to heal what you violently butchered, Cashin. That isn't how the magic works. That isn't how I work." "I am your king," he roared, the sound vibrating the remaining stained glass in the windows. "I command you to accept the mate bond. The pack is falling. The wards are dead. I am. His voice broke. A sudden, terrifying crack in his absolute authority. I am losing my mind, Luna. You made a strategic choice for the survival of your lineage, Luna quoted back to him, her voice perfectly steady, empty of the mockery she had used in the Grand Hall. This was just the cold, hard truth. You chose Diana. You chose the Northern armies. You chose armor. I didn't know, Cashin pleaded, his grip tightening. A solitary tear, black as ink, spilled over his lower lash line. I didn't know what you were. And that is exactly why the universe is letting you rot, Luna whispered, reaching up to gently pry his fingers from her dress. Surprisingly, he let her. Because you needed to know my pedigree to treat me with basic decency. You needed a title to value my life. You rejected a frail, orphaned girl, Cashin. You didn't reject a political liability. You rejected your own humanity. Cashin collapsed forward, catching himself on his hands. He was on his hands and knees before her, gasping for air as the feral curse squeezed his lungs. The proud, untouchable king of the Silverbane pack was reduced to a shivering, broken mess on the floor of an abandoned church. Please, he choked out, the word tearing at his throat. It was the first time in his 32 years of life he had ever begged for anything. I am sorry. By the goddess, Luna, I am sorry. What do I have to do? Tell me what to do. Luna looked down at him. The phantom pain in her chest flared, urging her to reach out, to soothe the savage beast currently tearing him apart from the inside. It would be so easy to let the silver flow, to cleanse his blood, to take her place beside him on the throne. But a broken king, who only wanted her to save his own life, would just break her again tomorrow. You want to know what you have to do to earn the bond back? Luna asked softly. Cashin nodded frantically, staring up at her with desperate, hollow eyes. Luna reached into her pocket, pulling out the small obsidian knife. She held it out to him, hilt first. Let your pride die, Luna said, her voice echoing in the quiet church. You built your throne on dominance and fear. You rejected me because I threatened your image of absolute power. If you want me to anchor your soul, Cashin, you have to prove you actually have one. Cashin stared at the black glass blade. Sever your own alpha spark, Luna commanded, her eyes flashing a blinding, terrifying silver. Relinquish the crown. Become a broken Omega just like you thought I was. If you survive it, I will save you. If you don't, the rot takes you tonight. The obsidian blade rested in the center of Cashin's trembling palm. It was no larger than a letter opener, yet it felt heavier than the crown he had worn since he was 20 years old. It was a crude, ancient thing, forged from volcanic glass and steeped in the old magics of the earth. To sever one's own alpha spark was a concept so abhorrent, so deeply unnatural to werewolf biology that there wasn't even a formal term for it in modern pack law. An alpha's spark was their identity, their physical strength, their connection to the earth, and their absolute authority over lesser wolves. To kill, it was to essentially castrate one's own soul. He would become an Omega, the lowest rung of the hierarchy, devoid of command, vulnerable to the psychic weight of every other wolf in the vicinity. Do it, Luna whispered, her voice a soft, unrelenting breeze in the suffocating stillness of the church. Or let the feral rot take you. The choice is yours, King Cashin. The feral beast inside Cashin's mind screamed in raw, blinding terror. It didn't want to die. It didn't want to submit. The black veins pulsing beneath the skin of his face throbbed violently, and a sudden, involuntary snarl ripped from his throat. The rot urged him to lunge forward, to rip the frail girl's throat out, to bathe in her silver blood, and take her power by force. His claws extended, scraping agonizingly against the marble floor. He looked up at Luna. She didn't flinch. She simply knelt there, a half-mortal woman bathed in the flickering light of a single battery-powered lantern, watching a monster decide its own fate. Cashin closed his pitch-black eyes. He remembered his father's dying words. Never show weakness, Cashin. The crown is built on teeth and blood. To bend is to break. He had lived his entire life by that brutal philosophy. He had built an empire, secured borders, and hoarded wealth. And what had it brought him? He was dying on the floor of a ruined sanctuary, his kingdom burning behind him, begging the only woman who had ever seen him clearly to save his miserable life. The power hadn't made him a king. It had made him a prisoner. With a ragged, breathless sob that shattered his stoic facade completely, Cashin flipped the obsidian knife, pointing the jagged tip directly at the center of his own chest, right over his sternum where the alpha spark resided. He didn't hesitate. He drove the blade inward. The physical pain was negligible compared to the apocalyptic spiritual rupture that followed. Cashin's spine arched at an impossible angle as a shockwave of pure pitch-black energy exploded from his chest, shattering the remaining stained glass windows of the church in a deafening shower of colored rain. He screamed, a sound not of a wolf, but of a broken, ordinary man. Inside his mind, the massive, dominating silver-gray wolf that had defined his existence collapsed. The golden aura of command that had always radiated from his skin evaporated into the damp air like smoke. The severing ripped through his nervous system, setting every pain receptor on fire. He pulled the blade out, and thick black blood spilled onto the white marble. Cashin collapsed onto his side, violently gasping for air. His body suddenly felt impossibly heavy, frail, and agonizingly cold. The acute superhuman senses he had relied on for a decade vanished. He couldn't hear the wind miles away anymore. He couldn't smell the intricate layers of the forest. He was deafened by his own erratic heartbeat. He was nothing. He curled into a fetal position, shivering uncontrollably as the dark, feral rot that had been feeding on his alpha dominion starved to death in his veins. The black lines on his skin slowly faded into bruised, sickly purple. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the cold embrace of death, knowing he deserved nothing less for his hubris. Instead, he felt a small, warm hand rest gently against his cheek. Luna looked down at the shivering, broken man on the floor. The terrifying, oppressive aura that had always surrounded Cashin was completely gone. The great Alpha King was dead. In his place was just Cashin, stripped bare, deeply flawed, utterly vulnerable. He had actually done it. Luna exhaled a long, shaky breath, releasing the iron grip she had held on her own sealing spell. The silver sap burning against her collarbone had not yet fully calcified her wolf. She reached up, wiping the sap away with the hem of her ruined sleeve. "Maeve," Luna called out softly, not taking her eyes off Cashin. The old witch groaned from the rubble of the pews, slowly sitting up and rubbing her head. "By the goddess," the shockwave, "is he dead?" "He killed the beast," Luna murmured, sliding closer to Cashin. She gently maneuvered his heavy, limp frame until his head rested in her lap. His skin was freezing, his breathing dangerously shallow. His eyes fluttered open. The terrifying hollow black was gone, replaced by his natural stormy gray, though they were clouded with pain and disorientation. "Luna," Cashin rasped, his voice barely a whisper. There was no command in it anymore, only reverence. "It hurts. Everything, it's so quiet." "I know," she soothed, brushing a damp lock of hair from his forehead. "You've been shouting for so long, Cashin. The quiet is going to take some getting used to." Luna closed her eyes, tapping into the deep, subterranean well of Aurelian magic she had hidden her entire life. It didn't feel like the aggressive, fiery heat of an alpha's power. It felt like stepping into a cool, moonlit river. Ancient, sorrowful, endlessly forgiving. She placed her hands, flat against the bloody wound on his chest. "I, Luna of the Aurelian line, accept this broken soul." The words weren't spoken aloud. They resonated through the very foundations of the earth beneath the church. The air pressure in the sanctuary dropped. A blinding, pure silver light began to pour from Luna's palms, bleeding directly into Cashin's chest. Cashin gasped, his back arching slightly, but it wasn't from pain. It was an overwhelming, intoxicating rush of pure vitality. The silver magic surged through his veins, flushing out the remaining bruised remnants of the feral rot. It stitched the torn tissue of his chest together in seconds. But the magic didn't stop at physical healing. It wove itself into his empty, echoing mind, where his dominating alpha spark had once sat like a tyrant on a throne. The Aurelian magic built a soft, glowing hearth. A new bond. Not one based on submission or hierarchy, but on absolute, willing surrender. He could feel her now, not as a subordinate, but as something vast, powerful, terrifyingly beautiful. She wasn't just a wolf. She was the anchor of the earth. Luna opened her eyes. They were glowing with that brilliant metallic silver, illuminating the ruined church. She looked down at him, a genuine, soft smile finally breaking through her stoic mask. "You don't need to carry the kingdom alone anymore, Cassian," she whispered. "Let me share the weight." Cassian stared up at her, tears spilling from his stormy gray eyes, washing away the dried blood on his cheeks. He reached up, his hand no longer trembling, and gently cupped the back of her neck, pulling her down to rest his forehead against hers. For the first time in his life, the King of the North felt entirely safe. "My Luna," he breathed, "my queen." The Silverbane estate was a war zone. Fires burned on the manicured lawns, casting long, erratic shadows against the grand marble columns of the manor. The feral rogues, driven mad by the vacuum of power when Cassian's wards collapsed, had breached the inner courtyard. Silas, covered in mud and his own blood, swung a heavy silver baton, shattering the jaw of a rabid rogue that lunged at his throat. He was exhausted. The pack enforcers were fighting a losing battle. Without their alpha's aura to bolster their strength and coordinate their minds, they were fighting as individuals against a mindless swarm. Diana, the supposed savior from the north, was nowhere to be seen on the front lines. She had barricaded herself in the panic room an hour ago, demanding a helicopter extraction that was never coming. "Fall back to the Grand Hall," Silas roared over the din of snarling wolves and shattering glass. "Protect the pups." He turned to strike another rogue, but suddenly a sound pierced the chaos. It wasn't a howl. It was the heavy, rhythmic thrumming of a helicopter rotor slicing through the night sky. Silas looked up, squinting against the harsh glare of a tactical spotlight as the sleek black aircraft descended rapidly toward the center of the lawn, uncaring of the battle raging below. The rogues paused, disoriented by the noise and light. The aircraft touched down with a heavy thud, the blades slowing. The side door slid open. Silas expected to see reinforcements. Instead, a single figure stepped out onto the blood-soaked grass. It was Luna. She was still wearing the ruined, blood-stained charcoal dress, but she looked entirely different. She wasn't holding a weapon. She didn't drop into a defensive stance. She simply stood straight, her chin raised, her hands resting calmly at her sides. A feral rogue, massive and frothing black saliva, locked eyes with her and charged, sensing a weak, easy target. Silas screamed a warning, lunging forward, but he was too far away. Luna didn't move. She merely opened her eyes fully. They were blazing like twin silver stars in the darkness. She released her aura. It didn't hit the battlefield like a physical blow. It swept over the estate like a sudden, freezing tidal wave. The air snapped with static electricity. Every wolf on the lawn, enforcer and feral rogue alike, was instantly driven to their knees, pressed against the earth by an overwhelming, ancient gravity. The charging rogue hit the invisible wall of her presence and collapsed, whining pitifully, its rabid mind suddenly forced into silence by the pure filtering light of the Aurelian magic. Total, deafening silence fell over the estate. From the shadows of the helicopter cabin, Cassian stepped down. He was battered, pale, changed. The pack enforcers stared in shock. They couldn't feel his alpha spark. He was biologically an omega. Yet as he walked up to stand beside Luna, he exuded a quiet, unshakable dignity that was infinitely more powerful than his old dominance. He didn't stand in front of her. He stood half a step behind her left shoulder. The position of a king's consort. Cashin looked out over his bruised, bleeding pack, his eyes locking with Silas's stunned gaze. "The wards are restored," Cashin said, his voice clear and steady. "The feral rot has been cleansed from our borders, and it was not by my hand." He turned to Luna. And in front of hundreds of his warriors, the former Alpha King dropped to one knee, bowing his head in absolute, willing submission. "Hail the Aurelian," Cashin said. "Hail the true Luna of Silverbane." Slowly, one by one, the battered enforcers lowered their heads, pressing their fists to the blood-soaked grass in reverence. Silas dropped to both knees, a slow, relieved smile breaking across his face. The era of Alpha Kings, ruled by fear and dominance, had ended. Luna looked out over her new pack, her silver eyes glowing with the promise of something different. Something better. She reached down and took Cashin's hand, pulling him up to stand beside her. Not beneath her. Beside her. The long, dark winter was finally over, and together, they will embrace the new day.